The phone buzzed against the nightstand at 6:47 a.m., jolting Eliza from what had finally become sleep, rather than just lying there with her eyes closed. She'd been awake most of the night, the empty space beside her growing colder with each passing hour. Her hand fumbled for the device, knocking over a glass of water she didn't remember pouring. The screen's harsh light cut through the dim bedroom, forcing her to squint. From Mason. "I can't come home. I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen." 13 words. 13 words after 16 years of marriage. Eliza read it again, then a third time, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Something that didn't feel like a wrecking ball to her chest. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. "What do you say to that? What question do you ask first when there are suddenly 1,000 questions?" She typed, "Where are you?" The message showed as delivered, but not read. She waited 5 minutes, then 10. Nothing. "Are you okay?" She tried next, her practical nature pushing through the shock. Still nothing. She sat up, the sheets pooling around her waist, and called his number. It went straight to voicemail. "Mason, it's me. I got your message. Please call me back. I don't understand what's happening." Her voice had remained steady, though her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. The room felt suddenly too large, too empty, the silence pressing against her eardrums like water pressure at the bottom of a pool. She switched on the bedside lamp and noticed her husband's watch still sitting where it always did. The expensive timepiece she'd given him for their 10th anniversary, the one he wore every day, without fail, gleamed in the lamplight, its hands pointing to 6:51 a.m. Whatever had happened, wherever he was, Mason had left in a hurry, and he had no intention of coming back. 3 days earlier, their life had been normal. Completely, unremarkably normal. "Don't forget we have dinner with the Henleys tomorrow night," Eliza had reminded Mason as they moved around each other in their kitchen's morning dance. She poured coffee into his travel mug while he assembled her lunch, a ritual they'd perfected over years of marriage. "Right. Thursday at 7, Mason confirmed, closing the container of sliced strawberries he'd prepared for her. "I put it in my calendar. Though I might be a few minutes late, that client meeting could run over." "The mysterious client," Eliza teased, passing him the cream. "The one you can never tell me anything about because of all the NDAs. Mason's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's the one. Big potential account for the firm." Mason had been working as a financial consultant for almost 20 years, building a reputation that had clients specifically requesting him. He was good at his job, meticulous, discreet, and charismatic in exactly the way that made wealthy people comfortable handing over their money secrets. "Well, Mr. Important, try not to leave me handling small talk with Richard Henley for too long. That man can make a 20-minute story out of ordering coffee." Mason laughed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I promise to rescue you before he gets to the part about specifying the exact temperature." He kissed her cheek as he handed over her lunch bag, his lips lingering a moment longer than usual. If Eliza had known it would be one of their last normal mornings, she might have paid more attention to the shadows under his eyes, or the way his hand trembled slightly as he reached for his keys. Instead, she'd just said, "Drive safe," the same way she had thousands of times before. Eliza had met Mason Whitaker during her final year of graduate school. She was pursuing her master's in education, and he was 3 years into his career, already showing promise at a mid-sized financial firm. They'd encountered each other at a coffee shop near campus, not in the cute, romantic comedy way where one of them spilled coffee on the other, but in the real-life way where the place was packed, and he'd asked if he could share her table. "I promise I won't bother you," he'd said, gesturing to her open textbooks. "I just need somewhere to review these documents before a meeting." She'd nodded, and they'd worked in companionable silence for nearly an hour before he'd finally introduced himself. "I'm Mason, by the way. Thanks for sharing your fortress of solitude." She'd looked up from her notes on educational psychology to find him smiling at her, his blue eyes crinkled at the corners. He wasn't traditionally handsome. His nose had clearly been broken at some point, and his dark brown hair was already receding slightly at the temples, despite him being only in his mid-20s. but there was something immediately trustworthy about his face. "Eliza," she'd replied, shaking his offered hand. "And it's hardly a fortress. More like a very small, caffeine-fueled island." He'd laughed, and something had clicked between them, that inexplicable chemistry that either exists or doesn't. He'd asked for her number before leaving, and she'd given it without hesitation. Their courtship had been steady and uncomplicated. No dramatic breakups and reconciliations, no significant obstacles to overcome. Just two compatible people building a life together, piece by piece. They'd married after 2 years of dating, bought their first home a year after that, and settled into the comfortable rhythm of a life shared. They'd tried for children early in their marriage, but after 2 miscarriages, they'd made the difficult decision to stop trying. The grief had nearly broken them, but somehow they'd found their way back to each other, reconfiguring their dreams rather than abandoning them altogether. Eliza threw herself into her career, eventually becoming the principal of an elementary school, while Mason climbed the ranks at his firm. Their life wasn't perfect. Whose is? But it was theirs. They had their friends, their traditions, their inside jokes, their vacation spots. They had plans for retirement, discussions about whether to downsize now that they were in their 40s, and the house felt too big for just the two of them. They still had sex, still surprised each other occasionally, still found things to talk about over dinner, or so Eliza had thought. The dinner with the Henleys had gone exactly as expected. Richard had indeed monopolized the conversation with mundane stories stretched to epic proportions, while his wife Sandra smiled apologetically and refilled wine glasses. Mason had arrived 40 minutes late, not the few minutes he'd promised, sliding into his seat with apologies about clients who couldn't respect normal business hours. "Don't I know it?" Richard had commiserated, launching into yet another story about his own work challenges. Eliza had watched her husband throughout the evening, noticing the way he seemed slightly disconnected from the conversation, his normally attentive demeanor replaced by something more distant. He'd been checking his phone frequently, angling it away from her each time. On the drive home, she'd asked, "Everything okay? You seem distracted tonight." "Just tired," he'd said, his eyes fixed on the road. "This new client is demanding. Maybe you should turn it down if it's this stressful. We're fine financially." Mason had tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "It's not that simple. The firm expects me to handle it. Politics, you know." She'd let it drop, chalking his mood up to work pressure and mental fatigue. They'd gone to bed that night with the routine ease of long-married couples, brushing teeth side by side at their double vanity, Eliza applying her night cream while Mason set the alarm, a quick kiss before turning out the lights. Looking back, there had been signs that something was wrong. The late nights at work had increased over the past few months. The business trips had become more frequent. Mason had been more protective of his phone, changing the passcode and keeping it face down when not using it. But these changes had been gradual enough that Eliza hadn't connected the dots. Or perhaps she hadn't wanted to. The day before Mason disappeared, Tuesday, had been unremarkable until evening. Eliza had come home from work to find a note on the kitchen counter, "Emergency client meeting." "Don't wait up. There's leftover lasagna in the fridge." She'd heated up the lasagna and eaten alone at their kitchen island, scrolling through emails on her tablet. Later, she'd called her sister Caroline for their weekly catch-up, settled in to watch a documentary she'd been meaning to see, and eventually gone to bed around 11. Mason still wasn't home. She'd texted him, "Everything okay?" His response came quickly. "All good. Just wrapping up. Home in an hour." She'd fallen asleep before he arrived, waking briefly when he slipped into bed sometime after 1 a.m. He'd smelled of mint and cold night air. "Sorry," he'd whispered when he felt her stir. "Go back to sleep." And she had, with no premonition that it would be the last time they'd share their bed. Wednesday, yesterday, had started normally. They'd performed their kitchen dance, though Mason had seemed more preoccupied than usual. He'd forgotten to make her lunch, apologizing profusely when she pointed it out. "It's fine," she'd assured him. "I'll grab something from that new salad place near school." I'll make it up to you, he'd promised, kissing her goodbye more thoroughly than usual. I love you, Eliza. Something in his voice had made her pause, a note of finality she couldn't quite place. But the moment had passed, and she'd headed to work, her mind already shifting to the day's meetings and the third-grade classroom's plumbing issue that needed addressing. Mason had texted her mid-afternoon. Need to meet a client for dinner. Might be late again. Don't wait up, 2 nights in a row, she'd responded, adding a sad face emoji to soften what might otherwise come across as accusatory. I know. I'm sorry. Big deal on the line. She'd sent back a thumbs up and heart, then turned her attention to the parent-teacher conference she was mediating. That evening, she'd gone to her weekly yoga class, picked up Thai food on the way home, and called Mason around 8 to see if he wanted her to save him some. No answer. She'd left a voicemail, eaten her dinner, and spent the evening catching up on grading teacher evaluations. By 11, she'd started to worry. It wasn't like Mason not to check in when he was going to be very late. She'd tried calling again, straight to voicemail. Texted, getting worried. Please let me know you're okay. No response. By midnight, she'd called his colleague and friend, Alex. Sorry to call so late, but is Mason still with you guys? He's not answering his phone. There'd been a pause before Alex answered. Too long to be natural. Mason? No, he left the office around 5 today. Said he had dinner plans. He's not home? A cold feeling had settled in Eliza's stomach. No, he said he had a client dinner. I assumed it was with your team. Not with us, Alex had replied, his tone careful. Maybe it was with the Richardson account? They've been taking up a lot of his time lately. But Eliza had known with sudden and absolute certainty that there was no client dinner, no Richardson account demanding late nights. She'd hung up with Alex and tried Mason's phone again. Voicemail. She'd checked their credit card activity online. Nothing unusual or recent. Looked at their location-sharing app. His phone showed as location unavailable. She'd considered calling hospitals, even the police. But what would she say? My husband is 3 hours late coming home and not answering his phone? They'd tell her to wait, that adults had the right to be unreachable for a few hours. So she'd waited, alternating between worry and anger, making mental lists of rational explanations. Car trouble with a dead phone battery, a drink with clients that went too long, perhaps even a minor accident that had him tied up at a hospital with paperwork. She'd fallen into a restless sleep around 4 in the morning, her body finally surrendering even as her mind continued to race, and then, at 6:47 a.m., the text had come. I can't come home. I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. After the initial shock of Mason's text wore off enough for her to function, Eliza forced herself to get out of bed. She moved through the morning in a daze, mechanically brushing her teeth and changing out of her pajamas. She called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, leaving a voicemail for her assistant principal that explained nothing beyond a family emergency. The house felt wrong somehow, as if the very walls knew something had fundamentally changed. She wandered from room to room, looking for, what, a note? A sign? Some explanation beyond 13 cryptic words? In Mason's home office, everything appeared normal at first glance. His desk was organized as always, the leather blotter centered perfectly, pens lined up by his computer monitor. But when she tried to wake his computer, she found it had been wiped clean, restored to factory settings. Methodically, she began opening drawers. Most contained what she expected: office supplies, files, the miscellaneous detritus of a working professional. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of manila folders, she found a prepaid phone she'd never seen before. Her hands trembled as she turned it on. No passcode required. The call log showed dozens of calls to and from the same number, labeled only as J. The text messages were more revealing. Can't wait to see you tonight. Same place? Missing you already? These stolen hours aren't enough anymore. When are you going to tell her? You promised, M. The most recent text had been sent yesterday afternoon. Everything's ready. I'll be waiting. Eliza set the phone down carefully as if it might explode. The evidence was undeniable, but somehow seeing it in black and white made it both more real and more surreal simultaneously. Mason was having an affair. Had been having an affair for how long? The earliest messages on the phone dated back 3 months, but that didn't mean anything. This could have been going on for years. She felt sick, a physical nausea rising in her throat that sent her rushing to the bathroom. After emptying what little was in her stomach, she sat on the cool tile floor, back against the bathtub, trying to make sense of her new reality. Who was Jay? Someone from work, a client? A stranger he'd met somewhere? Did it even matter? The practical part of her brain, the part that handled crisis situations at school with calm efficiency, began to assert itself. She needed more information. She needed a plan. Back in Mason's office, she searched more thoroughly. In his filing cabinet, behind the hanging folders, she found a manila envelope containing a lease agreement for an apartment across town, dated 2 months ago. Mason's signature on the bottom line. A 6-month lease paid in advance, so he'd been planning this. It wasn't some impulsive decision, some momentary lapse in judgment. For at least 2 months, he'd been preparing his exit while going through the motions of their marriage. The betrayal cut deeper with each new discovery. Their anniversary dinner 6 weeks ago, had he already signed that lease? The weekend trip to the coast last month, had he been texting Jay when he'd claimed to be checking work emails? Eliza moved to their bedroom and opened Mason's closet. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss. His suits hung neatly in their dry-cleaning plastic, his casual clothes folded on the shelves. But as she looked more carefully, she realized certain items were missing. His favorite weekend jeans, the soft gray hoodie she'd given him last Christmas, the vintage leather jacket he'd had since college. He'd been removing things gradually, she realized, taking just enough that she wouldn't notice but making sure he had what he needed for his new life. His new life with Jay. She sat heavily on the edge of the bed, clutching one of his remaining shirts. The familiar scent of his cologne clung to the fabric, and for a moment she pressed it to her face, inhaling deeply. 16 years of marriage, 16 years of building a life together, navigating losses and victories, creating a partnership she'd believed was unshakable, all destroyed by 13 words on a screen. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. For a wild moment, she thought it might be Mason, finally calling to explain. But the screen showed her sister's name. Eliza? Is everything okay? The school called me when they couldn't reach you. They said you had a family emergency. Caroline's voice was tight with worry. As Eliza's emergency contact, she would naturally be concerned by such a call. Mason's gone, Eliza said, her voice flat and strange to her own ears. He didn't come home last night. He sent a text this morning saying he can't come back. What? What do you mean he can't come back? Is he hurt? In trouble? He's having an affair. The words felt bizarre leaving her mouth, like she was speaking a language she'd just learned. He's been planning to leave for months. There was silence on the other end of the line, then a soft, "Oh." Liza filled with such compassion that it nearly broke her composure. "I need you to come over," Eliza said, surprising herself with the request. She'd always been the strong one, the one who handled things on her own. But right now, the thought of facing this alone was unbearable. "I'm on my way," Caroline promised. "Don't do anything until I get there. Don't call him, don't text him. Just wait for me, okay?" "Okay," Eliza agreed, though she had no intention of contacting Mason yet. Not until she had all the pieces. After hanging up, she returned to the prepaid phone. She scrolled through more messages, each one a fresh cut. They detailed plans, secret meetings, promises of a future together. Reading between the lines, it seemed Mason and Jay had been involved for at least 6 months, possibly longer. One message from a month ago stood out. "I know it's complicated with the house and finances and everything, but we could figure it out together. I have savings. We could go anywhere, start fresh, so Jay had money." That narrowed things down somewhat. Eliza moved to Mason's bedside table and checked the drawer. His passport was gone. So was the emergency cash they kept there, about $2,000. He hadn't just left for the night. He had fled. Her phone buzzed with a text from Caroline saying she was 10 minutes away. Eliza used the time to check their joint bank accounts. The main checking account was untouched, still containing the comfortable cushion they maintained. But when she logged into their savings account, she felt the floor drop out from under her. The account that should have held just over $87,000, their emergency fund plus money they'd been saving for a kitchen renovation, now showed a balance of $11,243. A withdrawal of $75,000 had been made yesterday morning, just after she'd left for work. Mason hadn't just taken his clothes and his heart. He'd taken their financial security, too. The doorbell rang, and Eliza moved mechanically to answer it. Caroline took one look at her sister's face and pulled her into a fierce hug. "What do you need?" Caroline asked when they separated. "Tell me what I can do." "I need to find him," Eliza said, the words coming out stronger than she expected. "Not to get him back. I need answers. And I need our money back." Caroline nodded, her expression shifting from sympathy to determination. "Then let's find the bastard." As they moved to the kitchen to make coffee and formulate a plan, Eliza's phone buzzed again. Another text from Mason. "I'll explain everything soon. Please don't try to find me. It will only make things harder. I'll send you divorce papers when I can." Eliza stared at the message, a cold anger replacing the shock and grief that had dominated the morning. "He thinks he can just disappear," she said to Caroline, showing her the text. "After stealing our savings and sneaking around for months. He thinks he can just ghost our entire marriage. What are you going to do?" Caroline asked. Eliza's jaw set in a hard line. "I'm going to find him, and then I'm going to make him face me." Confrontation. It took 3 days to piece everything together. 3 days of methodical investigation, calling in favors, and pushing past the shame and humiliation to ask uncomfortable questions. Caroline stayed with her the entire time, manning the coffee maker, ordering food when Eliza forgot to eat, and offering both practical help and emotional support. Mason's colleague Alex had been reluctant to share information at first, citing privacy and professional ethics. But when Eliza mentioned the missing $75,000, his resistance crumbled. "Look, I don't know details," he admitted during their tense coffee meeting, "but there have been rumors about Mason and Julianne Clark for months." "Julianne Clark?" The name sounded vaguely familiar to Eliza. "The investment banker?" Alex nodded, looking miserable. "She became a client about 8 months ago. Moved her considerable portfolio to our firm specifically to work with Mason. Julianne Clark." So that was Jay, a wealthy divorcee who had featured in the business section of their local paper after landing a major deal. Eliza had even commented on the article to Mason, saying it was nice to see a woman succeeding in the male-dominated financial world. Had he already been sleeping with her then? Had he smiled and agreed while hiding his involvement with the very woman they were discussing? Did anyone at the firm know what was happening? Eliza asked Alex, keeping her voice steady with effort. There were suspicions. Too many closed-door meetings. Late-night strategy sessions that somehow only included the two of them. Alex couldn't meet her eyes. "I tried to talk to him about it once. He shut me down completely, said I was imagining things. And nobody thought to warn me?" The bitterness in her voice was impossible to hide. "I'm sorry, Eliza. I truly am. I told myself it wasn't my place. That maybe I was wrong." He finally looked at her directly. "I should have said something." With Julianne's name, the rest came together quickly. A search of recent flights showed 2 first-class tickets to Belize departing Wednesday evening. Monsieur Whitaker and Jay Clark. A call to the property management company for the apartment on the lease revealed that Mr. Whitaker had given notice 2 days ago, saying he wouldn't need the unit after all. They'd never intended to stay in town. The apartment had just been a staging area, somewhere Mason could gradually move his essential belongings without Eliza noticing. Through a friend who worked at the same bank where she and Mason had their accounts, Eliza learned that Mason had been moving small amounts of money, $2,000 or $3,000 at a time, to a separate account for months before the final large withdrawal. He'd been siphoning off their savings so gradually, she hadn't noticed the slight decreases when she'd checked the balance. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Sandra Henley called on Friday afternoon, her voice tight with discomfort. "I wasn't going to say anything," she began without preamble when Eliza answered the phone. "But Richard told me what happened and, well, I would want to know if I were you." "Know what, Sandra?" Eliza asked, already bracing herself. "That night at dinner when Mason was late? He wasn't coming from work. I saw him at Lakeside Plaza earlier that afternoon. He was with a woman at the jewelry store. They were very familiar with each other." Lakeside Plaza was an upscale shopping center across town, known for its high-end boutiques, the kind of place where a man might buy an expensive gift for the woman he was planning to run away with. "Thank you for telling me," Eliza said, her mind already racing ahead. After hanging up, she turned to Caroline. "I know where they're going. Not just Belize. I know exactly where in Belize. For their 10th anniversary, Mason had taken Eliza to a small exclusive resort on Ambergris Cay. They'd spent a week in paradise, snorkeling in the clear waters and eating fresh seafood at sunset. Mason had called it the most perfect place he'd ever been, saying someday they should return and stay longer, maybe even buy a small property there. It had been a dream they'd shared, retiring to a beachfront cottage, escaping cold winters and embracing a simpler life. Now he was living that dream with someone else? "You think he'd really be that obvious?" Caroline asked skeptically. "Taking his mistress to the same place he took you?" "It's exactly what he'd do," Eliza said with certainty. "It's remote, beautiful, and he already knows his way around. Plus, Belize has pretty favorable residency options for foreigners with money." She paused, the full weight of the betrayal hitting her again. "He's not just having an affair, Care. He's completely starting over. New woman, new life, new country. So what's your plan? Fly to Belize and confront them? That's a lot of money and effort just to tell him he's a piece of shit. You could do that via text for free?" Eliza shook her head. "This isn't about calling him names. It's about looking him in the eye when I demand my half of the money he stole. It's about not letting him turn me into a footnote he can erase with a text message." Caroline studied her sister's face, then nodded slowly. "All right then. Let's book you a flight to Belize." The Pelican Sunset Resort looked exactly as Eliza remembered it, a collection of pastel-colored cottages nestled among palm trees, with a pristine beach stretching before them. The main difference was how she was seeing it now, through the lens of betrayal rather than romance. She'd checked into a different resort half a mile down the beach, using the emergency credit card she kept in her name only. The irony that she was using her emergency fund to deal with the emergency of her husband stealing their actual emergency fund wasn't lost on her. It hadn't been difficult to confirm Mason and Julianne were staying at Pelican Sunset. A quick call posing as Mason's assistant checking on their reservation had yielded their cottage number and arrival date. They'd been there for 2 days already. Eliza had spent those 2 days carefully observing from a distance, learning their routine. They rose late, had breakfast on their private patio, spent the afternoon on the beach or taking a boat out to the reef, then dressed for dinner at the resort restaurant. They looked happy, carefree. Mason smiled more than Eliza had seen in years, his body language relaxed and affectionate with Julianne. Watching them together was like having her heart extracted with dull surgical tools, but she forced herself to do it. She needed to understand what she was walking into, needed to be prepared. On her 3rd day in Belize, Eliza put her plan into action. She knew Mason would be alone for at least an hour that morning. She'd overheard Julianne at the beach bar the previous day, booking a massage at the resort spa for 10 a.m. At 10:15, dressed in a simple sundress and oversized sunglasses, her hair pulled back in a way Mason had always liked. Eliza walked directly to Cottage 7 and knocked on the door. She heard movement inside. Then Mason's voice called, "Forget your key?" The door swung open, and there he stood, tanned, relaxed, wearing only swim trunks and a faded t-shirt, a coffee mug in his hand. The moment he registered who was at the door, the mug slipped from his grasp, shattering on the tile floor. "Eliza." Her name came out as a strangled whisper. "How did you—" "Hello, Mason," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "Aren't you going to invite me in? I've come a long way to see you." His face had gone ashen beneath his tan, but he stepped back mechanically, allowing her to enter. The cottage was beautiful, all white linens and natural wood, with French doors opening to a view of the Caribbean Sea. Julianne's things were scattered around. A silk robe draped over a chair, expensive sandals by the door, a designer handbag on the table. "You shouldn't be here," Mason finally said, finding his voice. He looked nervously toward the door, as if expecting Julianne to appear at any moment. "Don't worry. Your girlfriend won't be back for a while," Eliza said, moving to the seating area and choosing a chair that gave her a clear view of both Mason and the door. She splurged on the 90-minute massage package. "We have time to talk." Mason ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Eliza's chest ache despite everything. "There's nothing to talk about. I'm sorry it happened this way. I never wanted to hurt you." "And yet here we are," Eliza replied, removing her sunglasses and fixing him with a direct stare. "You stole $75,000 from our joint savings, Mason. That's not just hurting me, it's a crime." He had the decency to look ashamed. "I was going to pay you back. I will pay you back. I just needed startup capital, she repeated flatly. "Is that what you call it?" "Because I call it theft. Half of that money is legally mine." "I know." He paced the small living area, careful to step around the broken mug and spilled coffee. "This wasn't planned, Eliza. It just happened." She laughed, a harsh sound that made him flinch. "Really?" "Because the apartment lease from 2 months ago, the gradual movement of cash, and the first-class tickets suggest otherwise. This wasn't spontaneous, Mason. This was calculated." He stopped pacing and faced her, something hardening in his expression. "Fine, yes, we planned it. For the past 3 months, we've been planning to leave. But the feeling, what happened between Julianne and me, that wasn't planned. When did it start?" The question had been burning inside her since she'd found the prepaid phone. "How long were you lying to my face?" Mason sighed and sank onto the couch across from her. "We met last November, when she transferred her accounts to our firm. It was professional at first. Then we had dinner to discuss investment strategies, and there was something there. A connection. A connection," Eliza echoed. "So special it was worth destroying 16 years of marriage over." "Our marriage was already in trouble, Eliza. You know that." The accusation stung, mostly because it contained a grain of truth. They had settled into a comfortable routine that sometimes felt more like friendship than passion. But they'd been working on it. Weekend getaways, date nights, small efforts to keep the spark alive. We were in a rut, Mason, not a crisis. Couples go through phases. We could have talked about it, gone to counseling, made changes together. Would you have been open to that? He challenged. "You've always been so certain about everything, so confident in your plan for our lives. When was the last time you asked me what I wanted?" "Don't you dare turn this around on me," Eliza said, her voice rising slightly before she controlled it. "If you were unhappy, you should have said something. Not fucked your client and stolen our money." Mason winced at her crude language, so unlike her usual measured tone. "It wasn't just about being unhappy. With Julianne, I felt alive again, seen, valued. And what about me? Did you ever consider how I'd feel reading that pathetic text message after 16 years together? Did you consider I might want some actual closure, not 13 words on a screen?" He had the grace to look genuinely remorseful. "I couldn't face you, Eliza. I'm a coward, I know that. It was easier to run." "Easier for you," she corrected. "Not for me." They sat in heavy silence for a moment, the sounds of the beach, waves lapping, palms rustling, filtering through the open windows. It felt surreal to be having this conversation in paradise, surrounded by such beauty while discussing the ugly remnants of their marriage. "I want my share of the money," Eliza finally said. "That's why I'm here. $37,500. "Half of what you took," Mason nodded slowly. "That's fair. I can wire it to you. Today," she insisted. "Before I leave this cottage, I'll need my laptop. And my phone." He gestured to the bedroom. "May I?" Eliza nodded, watching closely as he disappeared into the bedroom and returned moments later with his devices. He sat at the small dining table and began the process of accessing his accounts. "You know this doesn't change anything," he said without looking up from his laptop. "I'm not coming back. Julianne and I are staying here." "I'm not asking you to come back," Eliza said, surprised to realize she meant it. "I wouldn't take you back if you begged." He glanced up at that, something like relief washing over his features. "For what it's worth, I did love you. For many years, I loved you very much." "Past tense noted," she said dryly. Mason finished the transaction and turned the laptop so she could see the confirmation screen. The money had been transferred back to their joint account. "Will you tell me one thing honestly?" Eliza asked as she verified the transfer on her phone. "Just one thing, and I'll leave you to your new life." "What's that?" Were there others before her? Over the years, were there other women? Mason met her gaze directly for the first time since she'd arrived. No, never. Julianne is the only one. Oddly, she believed him. Whatever else he'd done, she didn't think he was lying about this. It was cold comfort, but comfort nonetheless. At least the entire relationship hadn't been a lie. The sound of a key in the lock interrupted the moment. The door opened, and Julianne Clark stepped into the cottage, her post-massage glow evaporating instantly when she saw Eliza. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, looking between Mason and Eliza with wide eyes. Julianne was beautiful in a polished, expensive way. Gleaming blonde hair, toned body in a designer cover-up, diamond studs in her ears that probably cost more than Eliza's car. She was also younger than Eliza had expected, perhaps early 30s. "Just finishing up some business," Eliza said, rising from her chair. She turned to Mason. "I believe our transaction is complete." "Mason, who is this?" Julianne's voice held a note of panic, as if she couldn't quite process the sight of her lover's wife standing in their romantic getaway. "Julianne, this is Eliza," Mason said, his voice strained. "My wife?" "Ex-wife," Eliza corrected. "Or soon-to-be, anyway." Julianne's face flushed. "You told me she knew. You said you discussed separation months ago." "He lied to you too," Eliza said, almost feeling sorry for the woman. "Interesting pattern, isn't it?" Mason moved to Julianne's side, placing a hand on her arm that she immediately shook off. "Jules, I can explain—" "I'll leave you two to sort that out," Eliza interrupted, picking up her bag and heading for the door. She paused with her hand on the knob, looking back at the couple. "Oh, and Mason? I've already spoken to a lawyer. Divorce papers will be delivered to you here. You might want to give the resort your real name, since they'll be addressed to Mason Whitaker, not whatever alias you're using." The panic on his face was almost satisfying. "You wouldn't," he began. "Consider it done," she replied. "Enjoy paradise. I hear the weather's lovely year-round." As she stepped outside into the bright Belizean sunshine, Eliza could hear Julianne's voice rising behind the closed door. "You told me your divorce was already in process. You told me she knew everything." For the first time since receiving that text 4 days ago, Eliza smiled. Resolution. The flight back to the States gave Eliza time to think. She watched the turquoise waters of the Caribbean recede beneath her, the same waters where she'd once snorkeled hand-in-hand with Mason, and felt a curious sense of peace beginning to take root. Caroline was waiting at the airport. Anxiety etched on her face until she spotted Eliza walking through the arrival gate. "You're okay," she said, pulling her sister into a tight hug. "I've been so worried." "I'm better than okay," Eliza replied, surprising herself with the truth of it. In the car, she recounted the confrontation, Caroline gasping and exclaiming at all the right moments. "So he just gave you the money? Just like that?" He knew he had no choice. And I think beneath it all, he knew it was wrong. Eliza watched the familiar landscape of their city pass by the window. The look on Julianne's face when I walked in, though, that was almost worth the airfare. "And you really told the resort staff who he was? So they could deliver the divorce papers?" Eliza smiled. "The manager was very understanding when I explained the situation. Apparently, they've had experience with guests in marital transition before." Caroline shook her head in amazement. I can't believe you flew to another country to confront your cheating husband. When did my rule-following big sister become such a badass? Around the time my husband sent me a 13-word text ending our marriage, Eliza replied dryly. When they arrived at Eliza's house, the house that now felt strangely more hers alone than it ever had as a shared space, Caroline insisted on staying the night. You don't have to, Eliza assured her. I'm really okay. Humor me, Caroline said. Besides, I've already ordered enough Thai food for two, and I picked up a bottle of that ridiculous expensive tequila you like. We're having a proper night of it. Later, seated on the patio with plates of pad thai and glasses of tequila, Caroline asked the question Eliza had been expecting. So what now? What's next for you? Eliza considered the question, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Honestly, I don't know. And I think that's the most exciting thing that's happened to me in years. What do you mean? For 16 years, my life had a definite shape. The shape of us, of Mason and Eliza. Every decision, every plan was made within that framework. She sipped her tequila, savoring the warm burn. Now I can be just Eliza. I can figure out what that means. Are you going to stay in the house? For now, Eliza nodded. Maybe eventually I'll want a fresh start somewhere else. But right now, it feels important to reclaim this space. Make it mine. They talked late into the night, about possibilities and fears, about betrayal and recovery, about the strange mix of grief and liberation Eliza was experiencing. It was the kind of raw, honest conversation they hadn't had since they were teenagers sharing a bedroom in their parents' house. In the week that followed, Eliza moved through the process of dismantling her marriage with the same methodical efficiency she'd always applied to challenges. She met with a divorce attorney, began the paperwork to remove Mason from their shared accounts and property, and explained the situation to key people in their lives. Close friends, her boss, Mason's parents who had always treated her like a daughter. The hardest call had been to Grace and Henry Whitaker. They'd been shocked and devastated, both by their son's actions and by the loss of Eliza from their lives. You'll always be family to us, Grace had insisted, voice thick with tears. No matter what Mason has done. I know, Eliza had replied gently. And I'll always care for you both. But things will be different now. At school, she threw herself back into her work, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms and challenges of leading an elementary school. The children's uncomplicated emotions and straightforward problems were a welcome contrast to the complex tangle of her personal life. It was in her office, reviewing the budget for the coming year, that she received Mason's final text. Divorce papers received. My lawyer will be in touch. For what it's worth, Julianne left. You were right. She didn't appreciate learning I'd lied about the divorce being in process. I'm sorry for everything, Eliza. I hope someday you can forgive me. She read it twice, waiting for the pain or anger to surface. Instead, she felt only a distant sadness, like hearing about the troubles of an old acquaintance rather than the man who had been her husband for 16 years. She didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. That evening, she sat on her patio alone, a glass of wine in hand, and thought about the text that had started it all. I can't come home. I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. 13 words that had shattered her world. But as she watched the fireflies begin to emerge in the gathering dusk, she realized something important. Her world hadn't ended when Mason left. It had simply changed shape, leaving room for new possibilities she hadn't considered before. She pulled out her phone and opened her text conversation with Mason. His last message sat there, his plea for forgiveness glowing in the twilight. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she typed, "Thank you for setting me free." Then she blocked his number, set down her phone, and turned her attention to the night sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Tomorrow, she would wake up in her bed in her house and continue building her life, a life that was entirely her own. The thought no longer terrified her. In fact, as she sat in the gathering darkness with the taste of wine on her lips and the sounds of summer around her, She realized she was actually looking forward to it. 13 words had ended her marriage. 7 words acknowledged her liberation, and countless possibilities stretched before her.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.